My name is Jenny Siblet. I'm from the Office of Research here on campus. We're very pleased to welcome Phillip Vannini here today. His presentation is entitled Backroad Stories from Unusual Trips Across Non-Park Nation. Please help yourself to coffee, and please bear in mind that this presentation is being recorded. So let's give a warm welcome to Phillip.
Thank you. I will turn on the lights a little bit because we have lots of things to look at. So hopefully coffee will be a luxury more than a necessity. A year and a half ago or so, I decided to begin a research project, which I had no idea how much fun it would be. And a year and a half later, which is now, I've traveled to 10 provinces and territories across Canada. Only Saskatchewan, Nunavut, and Newfoundland are left. Newfoundland will be the last stop, and that will be in July of 2013. To date, together with Jonathan Taggart, who's been my collaborator since the beginning, we have completed 159 interviews in, I believe, 89 different sites across the country. The scope of the project was to document the lifestyles of people who live off the grid. Now, off the grid tends to mean many different things to different people. Some people go skiing for a week and they don't take their cell phone. They say they're off the grid. Well, the government of Canada actually has an official definition for off the grid. They say that if you are disconnected from the electricity and natural gas infrastructures servicing your province, you are off the grid. By that definition, entire regions are off the grid. I mean, did you know that the town of Jasper in Alberta is off the grid? The entire Arctic is off the grid. So to make this simple for me, I mostly focused on homes with some exceptions. Towns, for example, and islands as a whole. So what I wanted to do today is to do something a little bit different, because over the last 18 months, as a result of my Canada Research agenda here at Royal Roads, I have endeavored very, very hard, together with the help of especially Kate O'Rourke now and Lindsay Vaughan earlier, two research assistants, who have been working really diligently to do public relations for this project. And they have been able to connect me with radio stations and newspapers and publications all across the country. So over the last 18 months, I may have done 159 interviews, but I'm pretty sure that for each and every one of those interviews, I have done an interview for the media. And it's been fun, but it tends to be the same over and over, and I tend to get the same questions over and over, which is great because it speaks to the fundamental curiosity that a lot of people have about off-grid living. But I have begun to know these questions by heart, and my answers are a little bit like rehearsed scripts, and a little bit annoying. So what I would do today, what I decided to do, if you'll indulge me, is to actually satisfy my own personal curiosity for other questions, and I have provided you with questions. The questions that I wish more journalists would have asked me, and that I hope more journalists and other people will ask me in the future. They are very unusual questions. You won't find in there why people live off the grid or how they do it. But those unusual questions will occasion answers that will speak to the broader issues. So I'll begin from very small details, and I'll use very small segments to put together a collage. And hopefully that will give you the big picture. Some of those questions, you can see them, they're in blue, actually come with hyperlinks to video or sound files. And most of them also come with photographs, and that I need to credit Jonathan Taggart for. So without further ado, any questions? By the way, we won't be able to cover them all, I'm sure, but I'm curious to see what kinds of questions you guys have. Anyone?
Okay, so this is a different context than what I was thinking would be, so I'm just going to launch into what I was hoping to get about initially.
Yeah.
Which is, this is a personal interest to me
Mm-hmm.
that people can live this way. But when I take my family, how do you bring your family to the conviction to live a lifestyle that isn't how they are now?
Give me an hour or at least 50 minutes and I'll answer that question. Select for those questions and you get the answer to that. I promise. Any questions from the list that I have provided you with? Yes.
I'd like to know what the most fairy tale house you've seen.
Oh, thank you. What a fantastic question. I think that would be it. A lot of you may have traveled to Tofino. Not many go further north. If you do, and anyone is welcomed at this particular house, make your way to these couple of artists who live about an hour north of Tofino. They get to their home by boat, their own boat. They found this bay sheltered from a variety of currents, but in this particular bay, as it so happens, a lot of floating docks moor naturally. They drift and they land on the beach from salmon farms that are around there. So they decided that all those floating docks would make fantastic construction material. They put them together. They decided to add some of their favorite colors and created the probably most fairy tale home in all of Canada, off-grid entirely. They grow their own food. They're vegetarian, so they're actually able to grow about 90% of their calorie needs. They are off the electricity grid. They burn, of course, they are off the electricity grid. They burn wood for heat. And if they need to check their email, they need to get on their own boat and go to Tofino, about an hour away. Or if they need to use the phone, there is a fishing station about half an hour north of there, where they can use the phone. And they are blissfully happy. Yes.
Who is the bravest person you've met?
Thank you. And by the way, if you have follow-up questions about any of those things, please. I'm going to try to give answers that are about 2 minutes in length. Now, Deb, you asked me the bravest person, right? Brian would be the bravest person. Born and raised in Duncan, Vancouver Island, he now lives on the shores of Lake LaBarge in the Yukon, a relatively remote place, and he's a goat farmer. He's got several goats. He makes cheese and he sells it with his wife, Susan, in downtown Whitehorse. This blue pipe here is how he gets his water. Lake LaBarge freezes, unlike most of the bodies of water that we have here in Vancouver Island. So during the winter, he has to drive out in the middle of the lake, where the surface is better for that, dig a hole through the ice, put the pump and the hose out there, and get water to the house. Let's find out why he has to do all that.
The why, yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is just that this is just such a lovely place to live. You know, you're close to nature. It's totally quiet, and if you want something, done, you do it yourself. You know, and but you get the benefits of, you know, having bears walk through the yard and having.
You said benefit, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. We chase them away, but still, it's nice to know that it's there, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, the coyotes howling at night, and the you know, the squirrels and the little birds and all the waterfowl on the lake, and you know.
So this is There was something unusual about Brian as I interviewed him. couldn't quite pick up what was so unique about it. Until about 45 minutes into the interview, after he had showed us around the house, and after he had showed us around his property, he asked for help with finding a particular door. As it turned out, Brian is 100% blind. Other questions? Yes?
Who's
Yeah,
the
but-
most,
yeah.
who's the most urban off-gridder?
Most off-gridders live far out in the country. Some live in the city.
I just threw a piece of birch in there. I found that in the alley this summer, a couple of nice big pieces of birch, and I cut them up. Somebody had just thrown them out. But for the most part, we are still using wood from when we built the house to heat it with. And so, and in this neighborhood, there's always dumpsters. People renovate and they throw beautiful fir studs out, to be landfilled. And so I just, on my bike,
I was just gonna ask,
Dive.
with a pickup truck it would be so much easier, but on
Yeah.
a bike,
well, it's still easy.
Yeah.
There's so many houses around here. Oh yeah,
it might take a few trips, I suppose, sometimes.
maybe, and I have a big cargo trailer for my bike. It's probably 7 feet long, so maybe not sure from here to there.
Yeah.
And so I can put big loads. I can put 200 pounds on that bike.
We're not using it right now because it's not cold enough, but
Let me put the picture up again. That is downtown Edmonton, the second oldest city in Canada. Conrad gets his electricity from these beautiful solar panels that face the backyard. And he gets his heat from wood, scavenged from construction sites and here and there. Like I said, most people who live off-grid tend to live out in the country, in remote places, in exurban areas. Some in suburban areas, but very few in downtown areas of very large cosmopolitan centers like Edmonton. When I asked him why, because to live off-grid, the rule of thumb is you generally need about 10 acres, depending on how forested your property is, to grow wood renewably. When I asked him why he hadn't decided to move out of the country, into the country, out of the city, he said there was a beautiful home here that I could recycle, that I could reuse, that I could rebuild using local material, so it was a lot more efficient. And also he said, there is one advantage that urban off-gridders have over all of the rural off-gridders. He said, we are off the one grid that is hardest to get off of. That's the automobile. You can rely on a bicycle to do grocery shopping and, as you heard, even to collect wood. Other questions? Yes?
What's the farthest you've had to go to find an off-grid house?
Oh, yeah. I haven't told my mom about that one. If you look north, you will eventually see, if you keep looking, if you keep driving, by that skidoo for about an hour on the Mackenzie River, you will eventually find Inuvik in the Northwest Territory, 69 North, which is in the Beaufort Sea. Inuvik, the whole city, I'll probably get to it later if you ask a particular question. Inuvik is entirely off the grid, entire town. But for the most part, people who live in Inuvik, as well as other Arctic towns, flick on a switch, just like mostly all of us, because the township provides them with electricity generated locally for them. But a lot of people who live in Inuvik, whether of European or Inuvialuit descent, still like to live part-time at least, like they did in the olden days, by driving out to camp. They call it being out on the land. And they may stay out for a week, for a few days, sometimes for weeks at a time, and fish, trap, hunt. This particular camp is not too far from Airport Lake, about an hour south of Inuvik. We had to first take this skidoo, drive it around the Beaufort Sea Delta, mesmerizing maze. And then finally get off the skidoo and snowshoe for about 50 minutes in the snow. And coming back home at dark was even harder and even colder, but it's the farthest that I've been. Thank you for indulging me in this particular format. I'm actually having fun. Other questions?
What's the scariest moment?
Scariest moment. Actually, it's a really good segue. Driving in this is the scariest moment. And I can guarantee you that this picture was taken at a moment when the visibility was actually good enough for us to be comfortable and take this photo. John took this photo from the driving seat of our blue Dodge Durango, a rental. We are currently driving on the ocean. This is the frozen Arctic Ocean. If you drive from Inuvik to Tahtayaktak, you will drive for about 45 minutes on the Beaufort Sea. You can only do that during certain times of the year when the surface is good enough. And I can guarantee you that you will not be able to detect the difference except for these cracks. But they mess with your mind more than they actually mess with your perception of the place. What really messes with you, though, is when the visibility goes down, because the sky becomes white, the sides become white, and the road is a very faint blue/white. And the very fact that you're also driving on the ocean is rather unsettling. And sometimes waves underneath the ocean create bumps. And actually, those are really good because when you feel a bump like that, you know that you're still on the road. And the reason why we were going to Tahtayaktak was to see the largest off-grid refrigerator in the world, which is 60 feet underground, naturally refrigerated by the temperature of the earth underground, which was dug up and used traditionally by the Inuvialuit as a community-owned and managed refrigerator. And it was a wonderful experience, but for the smell of a rotten seal. Other questions?
Who's the angriest crowd you faced?
Oh, that's... The angriest crowd was actually faced in one of the most beautiful places. I really encourage you to visit the Yukon. Shouldn't be doing this, but I have a favorite. The Yukon is my favorite. It's the most beautiful place in Canada for me. And this place is on the road to Alaska. And this particular crowd was off the grid, not by choice. They were, you see these mountains here? That's Kootenay National Park. So they were on a road that connects to Skagway, Alaska, and they were on a highway that is a highway into a national park. And Yukon, the Yukon is not the most developed territory. There are entire areas where rural electrification programs haven't quite stretched far enough. And some places, like this stretch of motels and lodges and homes, about 20 or so, are off the grid, not by choice. And when they caught word that I was coming, they actually invited me to one of these lodges and invited the whole neighborhood, which stretched 20 miles in each direction. And they had a dinner with us, and they had a venting session. They basically suggested that they are not particularly happy with having to pay upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars to connect to the electricity grid, especially because in their particular case, there's an electricity generating station, hydroelectric power, just a few kilometers away from them, but the high tension lines skip them and go directly to Whitehorse. I guess the point of this picture and the point of the story is not everyone is off-grid by choice.
The most awesome thing that...
Okay. I use the word awesome as in awe-inspiring. It's a small photo. Does anyone recognize this place? No? Yeah, but not too far either. New Brunswick. It's Hopewell Rocks, Fundy Bay National Park. I personally thought it was the most inspiring because I do believe that tidal power is one of the most untapped sources of renewable energy. There are some generating stations in Fundy Bay National Park. However, No off-gridders use tidal power because the infrastructure is simply too big. So I put this picture up to give you a ranking of sorts of the most used renewable sources of energy by off-gridders when it comes to electricity. First being solar, which dominates across the country. Second being wind. Third being microhydro. Those are the three sources of energy. And fourth, but I suppose everyone calls it a way of cheating anyhow, is generating electricity via the use of a gasoline power generator, which is a major no-no. It's a little bit cheating, really. So those are the top four, and tidal power is not used by off-gridders, but like I said, this place really reminded me of how awesome that force is, because it's a 6-meter tidal differential, which really demonstrates the power of nature that way.
So I guess I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
What, some examples of microhydro?
Absolutely. Really easy. Really easy. Microhydro is essentially the technology in small scale used by a dam. So the flow of the current of a small body of water is either channeled or non-channeled into a very small water wheel. If someone asks the right questions, actually later we'll see it as well. And this water wheel spins and it generates electricity. Very mild environmental impact, or none at all, depending on how you do it. There are just some key variables, which later on I may explain. But it's really simple, really cheap. I've seen it done with kitchen spoons.
Go ahead and lead us into what question?
Oh, no, I don't want to lead you. I want people to be curious about whatever they're curious about. It's more fun that way. Yes?
Well, I guess if someone has to ask you for the most inexpensive, the chappie with no clothes on, you have to have a look at him.
You bet. After all, I did promise skinny dipping, didn't I? In June, Jonathan and I joined an off-grid commune, a co-op farm, a commune. There are different ways of referring to what this was. And this particular individual, Gerhard, who was born and raised in the Netherlands and then moved to Canada about 30 years ago, together with a lot of his fellow commune dwellers, lived in one of the most inexpensive compounds that you'll ever encounter when you look into the off-grid world. He only had a 250-watt system for electricity. To give you an idea, the typical average urban home in a place like Victoria consumes anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 kilowatt hours. He was doing with 250, so almost 20 times less. Solar panel that was bought at Radio Shack in the 1980s. He had held a few odd jobs here and there, but essentially without income, or without significant income for about 30 years, and he just made do. He wasn't poor. He actually argued that he was incredibly wealthy, and the reason why he was incredibly wealthy was because having very little money prompted him to be resourceful. And necessity is the mother of invention. We get that all the time. So for example, for a refrigerator, for 6 months out of the year, it's not an issue. 8 months out of the year in Manitoba, it's not an issue. Have a nice box, put your stuff out. For the other 4 months, in his summer kitchen, if you walked around, you eventually found an area, about a rectangle, that, well, I would say about 3 meters by 2 meters or so. He was able to open that through a pulley, and the floor, that 3 by 2 section, went under the ground through this pulley, powered by solar electricity. And down under there was cheese, milk, a few perishable items. Down on the ground is much cooler, right? And it's cool enough in the shadow, in the shade, that he was able to refrigerate that stuff naturally with minimal expenditure of wattage. Pull it up, take whatever he needed, and then bring it back down. He, of course, had many other inventions and many other ways, together with his fellow commune dwellers, to live without less energy, including, I did promise, skinny dipping. bathing in a pond I should say, in lieu of a bathtub, bathing in the pond or doing a sauna. And when we were invited for the weekly or semi-weekly pond cleansing extravaganza, which of course entailed doing so in the nude, I thought of you, Colleen, because in no form or no regulation that I've ever seen you give me, there was a clause against or for bathing in the nude with informants. I had no idea what to do. Whether I did it or not, you'll have to wait and wait for the video when it comes out. We're still working on the blurring technology.
What is he holding in his hand?
A pump. A pump that, it's a very simple pump reused from some kind of machinery that uses to bring water from underground. Yes?
And could you juxtapose that with the most expensive system?
Why not? That's a great follow-up. Off-grid living can be done on the cheap like this, and it can be done very expensively. This is a trick answer. This is a holding tank full of diesel, plopped right in the middle of downtown Inuvik. And this is how we, Canadian citizens, give energy to the north, by shipping barges full of diesel so that they can burn it for electricity and often heat. Now, the interesting thing about Inuvik is that they have a natural gas supply plant as well. They have been using that as well. But they have been running out, so they have resorted to diesel. So that was a trick answer, because you were probably expecting, right? You were probably expecting an individual home that will come up. But this is something that I really wanted to stress, because even though solar energy is obviously not available 100% all the time in the north, I do believe that if there's anything that we can learn by some of the lessons that I've been generating, is to exploit solar energy more in the Arctic, at least for the time that it is available, rather than diesel and gasoline. That would be the most expensive. And in case you're wondering, prices have gone as far high as 80 cents per kilowatt hours in some communities. We pay about 10.
Who's the most committed person?
That's a good one too. From Leskiti Island. Dave, this is a photo of his kitchen. And I think you can see, in part, a few essential things. You can see the sink, you can see the washing machine, you can see the cooking area, you can see that the wall looks different. That's because it's made of cob. But the most important thing, which I think the photograph frames, is actually a portrait of his daughter, who by now is 7. And Dave was living off the grid because and for his daughter. He was and he is aware that as a society we have become increasingly reliant and dependent on resources, fuels, and other supplies that are dwindling and that are harmful, in part, for the environment. And he wanted to relearn skills of self-sufficiency and sustainability to pass on to his daughter, so that she has, because we have forgotten some of those skills, like to make a fire with wood, to dry our clothes on a line, to can the things that we harvest from our own gardens. And a lot of people who live off the grid actually live off grid because they want to relearn those skills and they want to pass them on, which is what has made my job easy. People who live off the grid are teachers. They want to share their lessons. He was so committed that he had absolutely no vehicle that he relied on. He only had a bicycle that he used from Leskiti Island to every 4th day or so pedal to downtown Vancouver. If you know where Leskiti Island is, Qualicum, you know, try and pedal on a recumbent bike all the way from Departure Bay and then from Horseshoe Bay on the upper level highway to downtown Vancouver. That is commitment to reducing your carbon footprint. By the way, not every off-gridder is so environmentally committed. Some simply want to live in far away remote places and they just turn on the generator. Some are very much driven by reducing their carbon footprint. So as you can see, I'm giving you answers to the bigger picture too. Other questions?
What's the funniest one?
Yes. This one is really recent. I'll just put a photo here as context because that was the living room in which we were. It's a cub home in New Brunswick, not too far from downtown Moncton. As a matter of fact, the family there, family of 4, mother, father, and 2 teenage daughters, a preteen and a 14-year-old. Acadian family, had a very large off-grid system, 4.1 kilowatts, which is at least twice the size of most of the systems that are generally used for off-grid living. So they had all the power in the world. But despite having all the power in the world to plug in blow dryers, toasters, TV sets, big suckers, right? Microwaves. Despite having all that power, they said no to all those things. And it was really interesting because a lot of people that live off-grid say no to some of those appliances because they just consume too much power. They had power to spare. And so as we were discussing around the breakfast table how things were going in the house, I had to ask, why not? Why not have a blow dryer? Why not have a TV? Why not have a microwave? And the 11-year-old girl with thick French accent, cutest thing in the world, she looked at me and she said, microwaves are boring. Which I think speaks to me about how normalized convenience has become, how we take for granted certain technologies that are now quintessential components of a typical home, like a microwave is now built in when you buy a home. The wattage, of course, is unknown to most of us, but any heating element, so blow dryers, microwaves, toasters, any heating element is a huge sucker for energy. We don't think about it. We don't know where our electricity comes from. But if you live in New Brunswick, then a third of your electricity comes from nuclear, a third roughly comes from coal, and a third comes from from hydroelectricity. So obviously, 33% of that popcorn or whatever you put in that microwave is done non-renewably, and it's boring as well. By the way, that is an art installation representing the sun. Other questions? Yes.
Here's a question off your grid.
Yeah.
In which province did you find the most committed people and committed government?
Even though I can't really give a definitive answer to that question, I can give sources for commitment that explain why more or less people would want to be off-grid. It's a delicate subject, but if you live in a province that draws most of all its electricity and sources for heat from non-renewable supplies, coal primarily, then you're much more likely to find very committed off-gridders who have a very serious moral cause. They also are likely to find people who are very committed in places where their utility company has done wrong in the past. So there are areas in Canada, for example, Ontario and Quebec, where as a result of power outages in the past, entire communities have been left behind and forgotten for days and for weeks. So a lot of people have gone off the grid to really spite their local utility. So, Ontario, Quebec, as well as Alberta, which is so dependent on coal, those are areas where there's off-gridders that are very, very motivated. And then there's British Columbia, where even though our energy is essentially entirely renewable because it's hydroelectricity and it's clean, the West Coast, as always, attracts a lot of non-conventional eclectic persons, very environmentally committed, who take it up to the next level. So even though I can't do a ranking, those are the reasons why people become very committed to it.
What's the most passive technology?
Passive solar. So, I'm going to give you a preface to really explain this before I explain how this functions. This is the preface. It's a picture that has very little to do with off-grid living per se, but it has a lot to do with grid living per se. This is a photograph taken from a plane upon approach or landing near at Calgary Airport. And it doesn't surprise anyone. Everyone has flown over massive suburban areas and seen these kinds of things. But what I've never really thought about is a fact, an incontrovertible fact about living in the West. And I'm going to probably speak about Canada and the United States, where we live generally on a grid system, where roads intersect on an axis north to south, east to west. And you may have noticed that driveways intersect roads at a 90-degree angle. So if your road is going this way, you turn right 90 degrees and there's your home. Driveway takes you to your home. And generally there's a garage and a living room facing the road, right? Regardless of the orientation of that home. If the road is going north to south, the driveway is going east, the living room is facing west. Wrong. You can't face west. You can't face north. You can't face east. Passive solar technology necessitates your house face south. 95%, 90% of your window space should be oriented south. About 5% east. Small window, that's all. A small window on the west side, a small window on the east side. No windows on the north side. Okay? That brings free energy from the sun, which is then trapped by thermal mass, which could be a floor made of rock-like material, of stone. It could be other things. It could be very thick insulation, R30 and above. It could be triple or, if anything, double glazed windows, very efficient. Or it could be, if you're more interested in being different and having a different curb appeal, it could be a different shape. A spherical shape is much easier to heat. Now, this doesn't necessarily entail passive technology at all, but this particular monolithic dome found somewhere by Red Deer in Alberta faces south. You can tell it's facing south because of the orientation of the solar panels as well. So how many cords of wood do you think you can use in the middle of Alberta in a winter when you rely on nothing but wood for heating? How many cords? Does anyone know about cords of wood? Okay. Well, this particular home was heated with less than 3 cords. Less than 3 cords of wood. Ask anyone who uses wood, and they won't believe you. So that is the most... the easiest thing to do is to switch around the 75% of Canadian homes that are facing the wrong way, including mine.
What's the falsest myth?
Falsest myth. It's a bit of a joke. Falsest myth is that birds impale themselves on windmills and die. They don't. I have asked that question, often to the loud laughter of people who've been asked, dozens of times, and the death of birds, there's only been one recorded death of a bird as a result of the operation of a windmill. So you can be certain, according to my data, that it's not such a big deal. What is to be more critical of is the actual usefulness of wind energy. So a bit of a negative note here. Wind energy is not the panacea for everything. It's very localized. It has to be, the wind speed has to be consistent, anywhere from 10 to about 35 kilometers an hour, to be used profitably, reliably. When the wind goes above 35 kilometers an hour, like it was this morning, your wind turbine shuts off because it wants to protect itself, otherwise it could break. And if the wind comes and goes in bursts, as it's often the case in most of Canada, that's not really good for the generation of electricity either. So you see wind not very often, and a lot of people actually have wind turbines complain about them or shut them off or only turn them on when necessary. Also because a lot of people who live off-grid, they love quiet, and they have a little bit of a buzzing, whirring sound that can be a bit obnoxious. So two false myths here, two false myths. First, that birds die on it, and the second is that the wind is the solution to the world's problems. And environmentalists will tell you that we must rely more on wind, and it's true, I agree, we must rely more on wind. But any good environmentalist who studies energy will also tell you that we must diversify our sourcing of electricity, and get electricity, generate electricity from as many sources as possible. And wind doesn't always make sense.
What technology is freest of maintenance?
Ask Jim the dog. Where's Jim? There he is. Here's Jim the dog guarding solar panels. It's ironic because there's really no need to do what he's doing. There's really no need to maintain solar panels. They're very, very free of maintenance. The only thing that you need to do is wipe off snow. There's a little bit of snow you can see there. That particular morning was minus 30. So like I said, what Jim Doug is doing is really not necessary. Solar panels tend to work very well under all circumstances. And if you look at a solar radiation map of Canada, if you look for one online, you will see that there are very unexpected and very large pockets of sun in parts of the country that you never thought was possible. It's expensive, obviously, to set up panels, but once they're set up, they work quite well, and they can work for 30 years or more.
And being in a cold climate doesn't matter?
Not at all. Cold does not affect it at all. What really affects it is cloud cover, fog, all those things. So, for example, here in BC, we've got about 6 months out of the year when the sun is not really available. So a lot of British Columbians who live off-grid combine solar with microhydro, which is always available year-round. Yeah.
Well, now we will question in case you talk about it.
Yeah.
What is the steepest driveway?
Oh, I put that up there, and I'm glad that I could because it means that I'm still alive. Obviously, photography does not render inclinations of that kind, but for this particular driveway in the hills of Quebec, not too far from the Laurentian region, we were warned weeks in advance to show up only with a very rugged 4x4 vehicle so that we could master that. And we had to gear down in the lowest gear and then floor. And at one point, we were going up so high that I could see nothing but the crown, top of the trees, and the sky, not knowing what to do next. He and his wife had to back up pickup trucks, carrying building supplies, because by driving normally, the inclination was such that all the building supplies would fall out of the bed of the pickup truck. Now you might wonder why. Peace and quiet. Peace and quiet and a great view on top of the mountains. Often people who live off the grid enjoy peace, quiet, a little bit of solitude, and the ability to solve challenges and work with the land. I asked, why not create hairpins and do this and do that? And they said, we work with the land, not against it. We don't impose our will on it. We just work with it. Of course, you might see that even building a road is working against the land. Obviously, any impact is an impact. But still, that keeps the neighbors away. Oh yeah, not too far from that couple. You have to understand that I am a very clumsy handyman. As a matter of fact, I'm so bad that when I watch Canada's Worst Handyman on TV, I don't even find it funny. Like, to me, they're doing just fine. So for me to be able to build my own home it's not even thinkable. A lot of people who live off the grid build their own home. Most build with wood. John built with rock. Let's find out why.
There was a combination, I guess I'll give you the full picture. I read an article in Timber Frame Homes, and it was on a project in Colorado where somebody had used industrial-like timbers to build a timber frame house on the edge of a mining town. And the house looked like the top of a mine shaft. It was sort of like an industrial building, and it had tower sort of things where you could think of mine shaft stuff coming out and trains going in, and I don't know what. And I thought that was really neat. It was a way to make a house that fit totally within or reflected on the community it was set into, but it was a new house, and it wasn't a mine. But they really found a way of making it look like it belonged. So that's how we ended up with big timbers and rock, well, what would have been cordwood. We've got a mine across, well, about 2 kilometers up and 3 kilometers. And it made me think of that. We wanted to make a house that sort of fit back into the environment as if it had just grown here. And so actually somebody came here the other day and said, oh, this is really nice. You know, you're restoring this old house. No, it's new. And that was sort of the point, was to make it feel like. So this land was given out to pioneers in the 1800s, late 1800s. The French had settled most of the Ottawa Valley and the farmlands, and when the English had conquered and wanted to bring all kinds of people from the British Isles here, all that was left was up in the mountains. So Scots came, the Irish had already been through Montreal, Scots came, and then the English. So this was all Scottish and English. Industrious people, the mine, all kinds of other stuff. So we fixed on a late 19th century architecture.
And it looks like an English house in the middle of Quebec.
We are using 4.3.
Okay. There's 2 videos in there. Nobody's picked them yet. Other questions? And this is the point now where you have, if you have additional questions that I haven't asked, don't be shy. The blue highlights are, some of those are videos as well. Yes?
As a mom of 2 school-aged kids, I just wonder how, do you have any examples of families? I know you mentioned that one example, but I think I would miss the social connections and worry about that for the kids.
You wouldn't. People who live off the grid may live in very remote areas or may live in very peaceful exurban communities where kids go to school and community is as good as it is anywhere else. What you really would want to worry about is not whether your kids would adapt or not. I've had this conversation many times, and everyone who lives off grid tells me we adults tend to project our fears onto the kids and use our kids as excuses not to do what we want to do. Kids adapt. As a matter of fact, a lot of kids take pride, right, in solving challenges of their own. Some kids may find it odd that they can't play the PlayStation or the Wii until it's sunny. That's when you have more power. Some kids may find it odd But really the key is for the parents, if there are two parents, there may not be, but if there are two parents, the key is for the parent to work out a workload distribution so that they're not both working away from the house 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Off-grid living demands hands-on care. If your system is not very powerful, then it needs even more hands-on care. I have not met one, even though I have met many families with kids, I have not met one family with kids in which both members worked away from the home every day, 9 to 5. If they both work from home or one of them works from home, it's doable. Otherwise, it's not doable or it could be very expensive. So the key is planning. Yeah. Up there, isn't it? Oh, yeah, that's the video. It's a 2-minute video. Is it the video? No, it's not the video. Sorry, it's not the video, but this fella that we met in the Prairie region of Alberta had all kinds of inventions, including a portable solar suitcase. A portable solar suitcase, in case you need to bring a source of power with you somewhere, maybe as you go in the woods. There you go. And of course, he also had one of the most incredible inventions that I'd seen. I talked earlier about thermal mass, how you need to have a way of stabilizing, keeping heat, or getting rid of heat. Well, he had been scavenging for 15 years containers of soy sauce, soap, water, whatever. And he had been filling those with water, sealed them all carefully, put them underneath his floor in the basement where there was a wood stove. The wood stove heated this incredibly large thermal mass, 3,500 gallons of water. And this water kept the heat consistent throughout his house. Because you know when you have a wood stove, you turn it on and it's really, 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 really hot, and then it goes off and it's really, really cold. If you have thermal mass, it stabilizes your temperature. And he just figured out how to do it with just scavenged containers. Really inventive fella. I wrote an article about him for Canadian Geographic, and it comes with a video. I will show you a video. I think it's thrifty. Oh, 1 second. Since we are in British Columbia, I will show you this video about BC.
Most people you will talk to, I think, will tell you that part of the allure of living on Muscogee Farm is that it's off-grid, that it doesn't have a car fare. And the general attitude of people that will trouble themselves to live in a place like this is independence. This place, as you probably found just getting here, is a pain. It's not an easy place to live.
No dishwasher. I have a blender, I have a coffee grinder, I have an automatic washing machine. I got an automatic clothes dryer. I hang it up outside and it dries automatically.
I think most of us have a great deal of fondness for that challenge.
After all the Y2K panic, every community had to have a disaster management plan. So she starts off, she says, okay, she says, what are you going to do when your power goes out? And I said, well, my power's not going to go out. She said, well, how can you be so sure? And I said, well, I make it myself. I have solar panels and a water wheel. And because of what I'm doing, I have 3 generators. But basically, if my power goes out, I fix it.
Look at here, a little turbine, you might be able to see, that the water hits, right? And so it spins and it makes electricity. It's very simple.
It's dead simple. He says, what we have on this island and we guard it jealously is time.
When I go to the city, I don't see what they got that I don't got. I live with as much convenience as I possibly can. We like being comfortable. So convenience isn't the issue. The question is, what's right about complete independence? And the question could also be phrased, what's wrong with complete independence? The way Melinda and I live is rare, it's unique, and we're colossally fortunate. We live in a place where we have the ability and the soil and water resources to grow the majority of our food. Our heat energy comes from trees that grow on our property. Our electricity falls out of the sky. We have the luxury of being largely independent from what's going on economically or socially in the world. This, in true North American terms, is a colossal luxury. What's wrong with that? We can't afford to have 3 billion people being that luxurious.
Ezra is actually a very well-known energy consultant, and I'm just going to end here by saying that he's right. Off-grid living is not the solution to the world's environmental problems. It's not the solution to a rising cost of fuel, and it's not for everyone, but for those people that are not afraid of the challenges of being more independent and are not afraid of adapting to some different sources of comfort and convenience, it's a very happy and fulfilling lifestyle. Will more people live off the grid in the future? Maybe, but the point is not that off-grid living is what awaits all of us, is what it can teach us. And we live in a society in which we're constantly told that costs of fuel are rising, energy supplies are dwindling, and the future carries nothing but anxiety and risk. And we will never be able to achieve the same levels of comfort and convenience that we have. And our kids will have less fortunate lifestyles than we've had. Well, what I have been able to learn from all these interviews is that none of this is true. We simply need to be more resourceful and rely on resources that can change the way we generate comfort and convenience without making our life worse. As a matter of fact, a little bit of self-reliance can make our life even a little bit better. Any final questions as I turn on the lights? Knowing very well what this is going to cause. That's off. That's on. So through this unusual format, I hope to have given you glimpses of this work that I've been doing, that I've been having so much fun with. 3 provinces left. And in a year and a half from now, the documentary video will be out and available for all to see. The book will be out as well. So this is all work in progress. The video that you've seen, just a little promo, and all kinds of stories that I've shared for now are all up for grabs, because things may change after we're done with Newfoundland, Nunavut, and Saskatchewan. However, by now I felt comfortable enough to do a presentation, and I want to thank you for coming and for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. And if you have questions for me, I'm here. Don't be shy.